All right, good afternoon, everyone. It's noon. That's our start time. I'm going to give about one more minute just to let the rest of the folks get in, and then we'll kick off our webinar. Those of you just joining us, we're going to kick off in about 30 seconds, just waiting on some other folks to get in and get settled. All right, we got a full house, so let's do this thing. So good afternoon, noon East Coast, maybe a little bit earlier for some of you across the country, but welcome to the third in our J.E. Dunn Industrial Insights webinar series. Basically, it's our opportunity to share with you all the lessons we've learned and the solutions we've come up with and ways that we've figured out to navigate this crazy economy and this wild market that we're all involved with. I want to quickly introduce my guests. As always, Mr. Scott Bowden's with us. Scott's an industrial project director with J.E. Dunn. Scott, thanks for joining us.
Thanks, glad to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, of course, Drew Overmiller. Drew, based out of our Kansas City office, engineering manager at J.E. Dunn. Drew, I think this is the first webinar for you, but certainly glad to have you.
Pleasure to be here.
And I'll say our most esteemed guest, if that's okay, Mr. Brandon Darrow. Brandon from SSOE, design project manager. You lead up the industrial and battery department for the Southeast with SSOE. That's correct, right?
That's right. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. We really appreciate it. Brandon, you've got an interesting background. Can you share just a little bit of kind of how you got to where you are?
Yes, I can. So I joined SSOE back in 2016 as a design project manager and led a handful of industrial accounts, a lot of greenfield projects, a lot of expansions across the Southeast. Over the course of the last couple of years, I kind of transitioned into a few different roles, currently now leading our Southeast Industrial Facilities Group based out of Birmingham, Alabama. I'm a civil structural engineer by education. And actually, prior to joining SSOE, I was an engineering officer in the Army for about 10 years. So that kind of led to some of my international experience that I've had leading design teams as well in some overseas applications. So
fantastic.
A little bit about me.
And on behalf of everybody, thanks for your service, bud. We appreciate it. So, you know, the theme this time is really uncertainty. And we're all sick of hearing about that. Let's be honest, right? I mean, it's been 2.5 years of uncertainty and no pause in sight. And I think what's interesting about managing uncertainty, especially in the industrial world, is this isn't new, right? I mean, it's not like uncertainty just popped up, you know, when COVID became a thing. Drew, you and I were talking earlier, and you said, you know, managing uncertainty has really never been a thing we've been exceptionally good at in the industrial world. And then COVID just kind of adds another layer of complexity onto that. Talk to us a little bit about why it's always been a challenge.
I think it's always been a challenge because for timing reasons, a lot of times projects are moving forward before all the information and objectives are fully defined. And that's why I've been involved for the last 8 years in project planning and trying to set the project team up to be able to adapt to change and reduce the waste and effort and time. One of my favorite quotes from a great philosopher of the late 20th century, Mike Tyson, he said that everybody has a plan until you get punched in the face. And that's the way a lot of our project teams are. You come in and you feel good and you move forward, and then something knocks you off your feet, and it feels like the whole rest of the project you're trying to regain your balance and trying to catch up. So it's putting that project team in a position to where everybody is aligned on objectives and what we're trying to accomplish with the customer for the project, so that as those things come up, they can efficiently adapt and they know when things need to be done, kind of the Toyota production model of last responsible moment. And reduce the opportunity for change to impact those activities.
I never thought I'd say this, Drew, but I think Mike Tyson was exactly right. That sounds exactly like what happens. So we talk about uncertainty. It's kind of a generic term. It's an umbrella term. It encompasses a lot of things. I want to get into some specifics about industrial facilities and where or what aspects of an industrial project really tend to lend themselves to high degrees of uncertainty. So, Scott, I'm going to start with you. When you think about the site and site-related uncertainties, what are the ones that really rise to the top, the things that tend to really throw us for a loop?
Yeah, like you said, the site, the utilities, just figuring out how you're servicing the site. With a lot of industrial facilities, a lot of them are in remote areas, may or may not have sufficient utilities large enough to service that site. So you got to work with a lot of the local jurisdictions and folks to upgrade and service the site. So that's really the biggest thing that I've seen in my experience with getting things. Just you can't start that early enough, right? And it frankly it leads to major decisions in site selection that a lot of clients don't really see when they're making those site selections. A lot of they're focusing on a lot of incentives and so on and so forth. And I found ourselves just constantly having to remind them, hey, this site looks good, but look at all it's got a lot of pros, but look at all the cons that we're going to have to do and the time it's going to take to get this site ready to be able to build on, right? Absolutely.
And I know, Brandon, you and your group are often involved in some of that early site selection analysis. And we talked in a previous webinar, there's a cloud of secrecy around site selection, right? So how do you engage those local utilities, those local jurisdictions to start to resolve those site challenges as early as possible when the client may not be ready to really reveal their plans yet?
Well, I mean, that's a great point, and that's something that we do navigate quite often. How do you evaluate a site's capacity to be able to support a project when you can't talk about the project to the people who own the land? There's ways around it. There's ways to approach it from a very generic perspective. Here's the megawatts that we need for the space. Here's the loads that we anticipate we need to evaluate soil conditions against. Here's how much gallons per water that we need per hour. The level of quality of some of the utilities that are coming to the site. The amount of renewable energy, right? Obviously, that is a huge thing that clients are concerned about. What is the amount of the ratio of the power that's coming to the site? How much of that is renewable? We've gotten good at being able to qualify a lot of that in a way that we can look at some of these sites, but uniquely enough, understanding the amount of utilities required isn't as easy as you might think, because some of the technologies of these products that are being produced, especially in the advanced manufacturing world, are changing so quickly that the equipment providers that are producing it don't know what their utility demands are going to be. So to play it safe, they come to the table with very large quantities of power or water or gas that in many cases are overly estimated for what they actually need, and inadvertently take a lot of sites out of the running that may actually be able to support it, but they don't know where their true utility demands lie. So that is a very unique thing that we're trying to navigate.
So really validating those utility needs should be an early part of the site selection process, and not just going with inflated numbers just to cover a gap, right?
It should. And again, it's easier said than done, because a lot of the times the manufacturers don't know what utilities are going to be needed.
Yeah.
But I would encourage owners, as they are looking at new sites, to not just necessarily take the utility quantities that they have and use it as a way to weed out prospective sites.
Yep.
If you have sites that are within some of those typical ranges, especially from a power perspective, working with an engineering firm early on, working with a contractor early on to potentially refine what your building requirements and process requirements are, will really help you in the long term be able to keep that selection of available sites as open as possible.
Yep. So, site related uncertainties, if you will, that's not news. And I don't think that's anything that's really evolved much because of COVID or current economic conditions. But I know one thing that has evolved, and I learned this from you, Brandon, is the uncertainty related to things like energy storage because of the ever-changing chemicals and elements that are being used in some of these new products that we're putting out. Talk to me a little bit about what you're seeing there and how you're helping your energy clients specifically kind of overcome some of those uncertainties.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it comes back to the pace that the technology that these products are advancing at. It's moving faster than we've ever seen before, and we anticipate it's going to continue to increase more and more rapidly as we move into the future. So a lot of times, it may take 6 to 8 to 12 months to a year out, even past that, for boards to make decisions on how much money, how much capital they have before they're ready to make an investment. And then they start looking for new sites. At that time, their technology has changed. Then it can take several months to actually identify a site, go through site incentives negotiation, at which point the technology may have changed. Then you're talking your design period or construction period. Again, the technology is going to continue to change. And with those changes, again, especially in the advanced manufacturing side, on the energy storage side, so much of it comes down to the chemical compounds of batteries, of cathodes, of anodes, and the hazard classifications of those compounds, of the amount that's stored. So if you're looking at existing sites, you may find that when you are purchasing a building, the industrial classification of the facility is accurate. And then by the time you're getting ready to design the upgrades for that building and start to do construction, your technology has changed such that you need to drastically change the hazardous classification. And now you're worrying about potential blast mitigation, explosion concerns of hazardous quantities, things of that nature. That may no longer make the building that you select early on even viable. So it's very unique and very important to start looking into that as soon as possible.
Yep. So that's obviously an issue for a lot of our industrial clients, especially, like you said, our energy storage clients. But Drew, I would posit that Brandon mentioned the technology evolution and the constant changes there, as well as the supply chain issues we're seeing and the uncertainties with when, if, how we can actually get things to the site. What are some of the big uncertainties, the big drivers that you're seeing in those realms?
We just actually had a 2-day forum discussing it, and the theme after 2 days was pretty consistent from construction trade partners and engineering and our project management side of components of the projects, and everything is early. It's engaging partners as early as possible so that you have those perspectives, because everybody brings an expertise to the table. And they're all stakeholders in this project. And we need to listen to their concerns and what their drivers are for their business. And it's pulling folks in so that we can then purchase early. It's adding some complexities to the management and some costs to mitigate that risk when it comes to storage, because sometimes, we have things that can arrive either 3 months early or 6 months late. And so then you have to manage that from a storage perspective as well as a warranty. And those can be managed, but you have to track them, know about them, and then track them. And getting things earlier also helps you to manage the cost side of the fence too, because it's purchasing early. It's also informing the design team as they get that, they have more certainty about what they're designing around, so that then they can reduce that uncertainty from their perspective on the project. So we've always had, even pre-pandemic, had an undercurrent of change. Now that we're working in an environment that adds layers of complexity to that and risk, it just makes us have to be more focused on managing the things that we can, so that we have the capacity to deal with this market as things arise. So the title of this is, how partnership can reduce risk, and that's absolutely true. It's pulling people and partners in, making decisions about who those qualified partners are, and because they're a part of managing that risk.
Absolutely. And Scott, some of that risk obviously is on the front end and the planning and the site selection and all that, but some of the uncertainty and risk is going to be associated obviously with either phase startup of a facility or impacts to the existing operations in a facility. How do you mitigate that? And I'm going to ask you to take that a step further. Not just how do you plan for that as the GC, but how do you make sure that trickles down to your trade partners, your subcontractors that are going to be working on site as well?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, is, I think Drew mentioned this, the biggest unknown is the constant change, right? It's having a plan in place, and then it's just being able to react and pull things out and switch things around, and just, whether we're doing pool plans with different trade partners for different sequencing, you talk about turnover, and we right now, the big thing is electrical switch gear. It's like, okay, well, we can plan for the 50 weeks that they're telling us right now, but at week 49, they might tell us it's another 6 weeks. So how do we juke and jive and adjust? And the best thing that we found is just having that plan in place, and then weeks prior to that, coming up with your, okay, all right, they're telling us it's coming next week now. All right, then we adjust and we move and we resequence around. It's really just, I think as an industry, we've been doing it now, and we've been in this dynamic market for so long that we're all learning. We've got to be on our toes, and we've got to be able to adapt. So it's not like the first couple months, everybody's like, how do we do this? We're kind of getting used to this constant, just changing things around. It's just anticipating that and planning for that ahead of time, and sort of building your different options and flows and sequences, and then figuring out which one to execute based upon the information you have right now.
Absolutely. And you mentioned pool planning, and you talked to Lean a little bit earlier as well. Have you found that pool planning is really the best communication tool to your trades on site as far as changing schedules or changing sequencing?
Yeah, by far. I mean, because you're getting their input and their buy-in, right? Because everybody has their own different levels of what they call scheduling, right? And this sort of pool planning sort of levels the playing field, and gets all your last planners and everybody engaged at a level where they got that buy-in. And then, like I said, once that change happens, it's like, okay, guys, this was the plan. Well, all the pieces crumble because of this one thing. So how do we together pull those pieces back together and go a different route? So it's constantly getting their buy-in and coming up with the best recovery plan.
Sure, absolutely. So one other area where I know uncertainty reigns, I'll turn this over to you, Brandon, is even on the economic and regulatory side. I mean, at the end of the day, whatever widget we're producing, we're still running a business, and there's those economic and financial and legal aspects to consider, and those have been in quite a state of flux as of late. Talk to me a little bit about how you guys at SSOE have started to help clients navigate those waters.
Right. Yeah, that's a great question. So kind of the two facets. I'll start first with the regulatory. We're talking about advanced manufacturing and a lot of this stuff, energy storage, battery, a lot of that current codes don't really account for. So you have the engineering and the architectural communities are coming together, trying to take some of the existing codes that we have, apply them to the way that we are heading into this new world of advanced manufacturing, and determining what is the safest, the best way, the most responsible way to design some of these facilities. You want to talk about battery production. At some point, clients are determining how many days storage of batteries are they keeping within their facilities, because we're not going to just necessarily the just-in-time supply style. You want to have at least a limited amount of inventory in play, but we're concern now about thermal runoff of batteries. How do you safely store batteries? It isn't defined in code yet. So, that's something that the community at large, the design community, is really starting to work around through lessons learned, through the smart approaches of what's the right way to design these facilities in a way that's safe. And then a lot of times we are educating and working with those local permitting jurisdictions. As Scott mentioned earlier, some of them are in very rural areas. That's the place where there's ample land to be able to build these facilities. But perhaps they haven't had large industrial facilities that have built there in the past. So there's an educational piece that we try to get in on very early, get to know the local permitting team that's out there, walk them through the process that is going to be going on within these facilities, walk them through the hazard classifications, why we are putting some of the mitigation items in place on the design, and ultimately trying to work with them to get their buy-in on the way that we are ultimately designing and building these facilities so that they feel safe and confident in these new industrial spaces that may be landing in their area. That's something that's extremely important. You need to start that communication early. On the other side, you're referencing the economic uncertainty, especially over this past summer. We've seen a lot of our projects that are getting delayed because of all the DOE funding that's out there. I mean, it's a great opportunity for some of these new clients, startup or traditional clients, to be able to capitalize on some of the money, the grants that are out there for some of these energy types of projects. Renewable energy especially is getting a lot of DOE funding. But as we can all appreciate, being able to actually procure some of that funding is a process. It takes time to go through the formal application process, the review process. And I can't blame an organization for wanting to ensure that they take their best shot at being able to receive some of that before they go all in on a major investment that nowadays you see billion-dollar investments on these projects all over the place. So that in itself is putting a constraint on getting to start building the project. But as we can all appreciate, the actual production date of when you need to have product rolling off your line really does change. So we get more compressed.
Fantastic. Let me mention real quick, I don't think I said this at the top, but I've got a fantastic audience on board. I see folks from a lot of different firms and disciplines and geographic locations. So if you guys have questions as we go along, please type them into the chat box. Some of you sent some questions ahead of time. I'll certainly be referring to those as we go through this, but this is really for you guys as an audience. So whatever questions you have, type those in and we will be sure to address this. But I want to kind of take this to the ultimate question, I guess, Drew, and Brandon's kind of on the design side, Scott's more of a builder, you're kind of right in the middle. And it blows my mind, and maybe you can make it simple for me, right? But all this uncertainty we're talking about related to site, related to the economy, related to chemicals and energy and processes and existing operations, how do you even begin how do you start a facility design, I guess, when there is so much potential for unanticipated change? Like, where do you start?
We start with the business case for the project itself. I mean, what is the project trying to accomplish? There's investors out there that have specific expectations for the project. We start there. And then early in the stages of the project, progress, there's a saying, go slow to go fast. And I prefer to say it, progress, we're making progress, but it looks different. The early progress is data gathering and understanding the environment of the project, what the drivers of the project are, financially, how this project, the business case is built, so that then the team is aligned with the project goals and can make decisions on behalf of the customer and make assumptions aligned with the customer that we don't have to revisit later, right? So that we're almost acting as an extension of the customer and understanding what they're trying to accomplish. So it's a lot of informational gathering, scope definition. A lot of the change and uncertainty on projects is understanding exactly what's in and what's out of the scope of the project. And then when you have so many team members, who's responsible for what? And then it's organizing that. It's also a culture. Culture is huge when you're building this early. It helps to drive behavior. One of the things that we work with is changing the mindset of all of the people involved with the project from thinking about what do I need to do today to what does, and to a perspective of what do other people need from me today? Because anything that you're doing on the project, it has value because somebody else needs it. And so once you start prioritizing based upon other people's needs, then by the time you get done with the project, everything's done because everything that had value was because somebody else needed it for their job.
Sure.
And you start to switch that mindset from, your own person or your own company to supporting the group. And that really helps to, when it goes to the pull plan, that's the essence of the pull plan is understanding those relationships between all of those deliverables. And it also drives the better questions to ask, when you get into phase startup or, working in existing facilities, is what does operations need from us and when do they need it? What do they care about? So we're a lot different than some, and we talk, there's emotional intelligence there, being able to read people and understand where their anxiety is. Right. So early on in the project, it's developing and establishing that, because that's the foundation that is going to get you through those difficult times later. Sure. And to be able to have people make decisions in real time that are the right decisions.
Fantastic. And you said something a little bit ago that triggered, you said this phrase of going slow to go fast, right? And I know that you're currently on a project, I'm not sure if I can say the name, I'll leave that to you, but a rather large project where that was exactly the mentality going into it, was we need to go slow to go fast. How has that been received by the design team and the trades involved in that? As far as that emotional intelligence and that agreeing that, that whatever I provide on this job is a value to somebody else. Are you having any issues overcoming that? Is that something that's been adopted pretty easily by the rest of the team? What's been your experience?
Well, teams recognize that a lot of times there's frustration on projects. And what we do is we sit down with them and talk through, okay, here's all of it's inputs and outputs, right? So there's a lot of things that need to be developed as inputs before you go to the next phase of the project. So it's setting down with it's not a command control, it's a partnership that we're working with them to help them understand. We can certainly work things out of sequence if the project requires it, as long as the team understands the risk that might pose and our plan to mitigate that. So oftentimes customers need renderings or things that early to be able to communicate to the community or others. And the project may not be at that stage yet, but there's things that we can do to accomplish that without having to do a full model. And, it's a lot of times it's understanding what the real needs are. So that we oftentimes use the 5 whys. You're asking for this. Well, why are you asking for this? Or why do you like this? Why do you not like that? Again, it's getting alignment. And we're doing that with our project teams early so that they understand why we're working this project in this sequence. And what you find is it's really amazing how fast things can be done when you only do it once. There's a tremendous amount of rework that's on typical projects, and a lot of times projects before the pandemic could survive with that, and you could do that, you could get away with it. In this market, you can't. So you're forced to be as efficient as possible and make decisions at the appropriate time.
Sure. So everything you guys have been talking to, in my mind at least, points to a partnership on the front end between the designer, the builder, and obviously the owner at a minimum. Whether that's a formalized design build approach or whether that's just a design build mentality, if you will. Brandon, I'd love for you to talk from the design standpoint about what you see as really the key benefits to that design build structure, but also just to, just for clarity, are there any downsides, any perceived or actual downsides to that approach that you've experienced?
Yeah, well, call it the traditional design, bid, build, delivery method, where you have your engineering and your architectural team that is completing a design before an owner is going to interact with the general contractor community, bringing on board a build partner. It assumes that the team that put the design together has complete awareness of all of the supply chain issues and all of the material shortages, and that the owner is 100% confident that the process layout and utility requirements they provide to the engineering and design team are accurate at the beginning of a job.
That's a safe
Those
assumption.
conditions don't exist. And so I think it's a point worth making, though, right? By integrating everybody into the team early, you don't have to make a bunch of assumptions. You have the owner that can come to the table and hopefully be transparent about what they know and what they don't know, so that the engineering and design team can design in flexibility for the areas that we don't know. And the build partner and the key trades can provide input into what materials are readily available and which ones aren't. And you know that during the design process. And Drew makes a great point when he says it's amazing how quickly you can design something and build something if you only have to do it once. If you are integrating the design and the construction team, it is all happening at such a quick iterative pace that I would argue that it is doing it once. But if you attempt to design everything up front, and then you get to the tail end and you're bringing on a key trade and they say, hey, this rooftop unit that you spec'd us out here, these are at 80 weeks out right now. However, I have this other product that we can get in half the time. Yeah, we just saved 40 weeks, but we also are probably losing, several weeks of redesign and relooking. How does that impact the mechanical system? How do those new loads impact the structural system? What are the new utility requirements that site may or may not be able to support? Having those discussions earlier really enables everybody to work through those problems in real time, and not have to go back and fix them while we are still attempting to achieve a deliverable date. So that is a huge advantage that I would say from the design side. There is some anxiety that engineers and architects sometimes get when you have a contractor looking over your shoulder and poking holes in your design. But as soon as they have that one breakthrough aha moment where someone who's been building these plants for 40 years tells a senior mechanical engineer, yeah, I like what you did here, but think about it this way. I mean, you build a level of trust early on, in this concept of the team environment early on, and your project, I mean, you can't go wrong at that point. There won't be a problem you won't collectively be able to navigate.
That's fantastic. I love how you laid that out. So Scott, what's interesting to me is as Drew and Brandon have talked through all that, I haven't heard the word contract, right? Nobody's mentioned contract. And I think of design build as typically a contractual relationship between the designer and contractor. But what I'm hearing from you guys is it doesn't have to be, maybe. Maybe it's more of just a mindset or a mentality or a culture among the project team. So Scott, from your standpoint, how do you achieve that level of trust and collaboration, even if there's no contract in place? And how important is it for the designer and contractor to come on board at the exact same time? Or is there benefit to being some lag in bringing the contractor on?
Yeah, I got an example right now. I'm actually working on a project with Brandon's group, SSOE, and we were brought on board just behind them. It's not a design build project, but we are collaborating. We're actually coming up with early release packages where we're working with the SSOE team on a weekly basis. We're sitting down, they're showing us their updated design. We're just like he talked about, providing that input. Hey, did you think about doing it this way? Let's change it up this way. But it all comes down to just culture, right? The client sets that culture from the very start on how they're going to make the selection. How do they bring the design partner on board? Then how do they bring the contractor on board, and how are we going to work together? So I've been very fortunate that this client is all about the collaboration, the teamwork, and kind of back to what Drew was saying, it's all kind of comes up with that plan. The team needs to have that strategic plan in place, right? Overall. And you got to work a little slow. You got to work through some of the details, but it's constantly going back to that strategic plan and showing the whole group regularly, hey, listen, this is the critical next step, and we've got to focus on this. And we've got to nail this down before we try to jump ahead. I know everybody wants to get ahead, but if we get ahead of this step, we're going to have so many missing pieces, right? And so it's really, really important that we have that strategic thinker that can kind of keep us focused on the next important thing. And it's a beautiful thing when the team can come together like we have in not a design build approach, but just, I call just design assist, and not even by contract. I don't even have an executed contract yet, but we're just working together as a collaborative team for the betterment of the client.
I think it's really unfortunate that you're not more passionate about that, Scott. I think that's an opportunity lost right there. So
Right.
what about, I know sometimes, whether we like it or not, owners may create these kind of prearranged or forced marriages, right, between a designer and a contractor. Does that prevent us from being able to establish that culture of trust that you talked about, or is there still a way to make sure that happens?
So it's not lost, right? But it frankly, it's going to come down to the individuals working on the project, right? So we try to establish that with every job, with every opportunity we have. But there's frankly, there's some clients that are more receptive than others, and some just go get it done and let me know when you're done, and but it's like I said, it's a joyful thing when you get a great team put together, and it's a lot of fun.
Love that. Question came in, and I think this may be for you, Scott, while I've got you, from somebody on the specialty subcontractor side. And they want to know, what does it take to become or to be considered a highly qualified trade partner for one of your projects? So I'd love to hear your answer to that, but I'm assuming that you're still going to point me back to the culture thing that you talked about. Is that fair?
Yeah, absolutely, 100%. You've got some trade partners that are great executors, right? And then you've got some trade partners that are great at call it pre-con and but then aren't great at executing. It's really getting those folks engaged very early on that just want to come to the table, understand what true value means to the team and how they can add value to that team, and then just all in, right? And frankly, the ones that are highly sophisticated, they can come in, they can find their way. Similar to us, a lot of times you don't even need to prove how you bring value. It's just like we got to select these people. We got to keep going with these, right?
Right. Yep. I've seen it. I understand that completely. So Brandon, Scott talks about bringing value. I think that's what we're always trying to achieve with an owner is to deliver value, add value to their clients, their businesses. So beyond what we think of as kind of the typical design and construction activities, what are some ways that a really experienced design build team can add value to their client's business? What are some ways that you guys have done that?
Well, I'd say there's maybe two different answers to this. One, assuming if we're talking a design build team, AE and contractor that have actually had reps working together, it's just like a basketball team that, if you come out on the court one day and try to play a game without practicing, yeah, you can still win a game, but you might have to work your way through it a little bit. But the more reps that you get, pretty soon you're able to pass, no look and to be able to get some assists like that. And you know where your partners are going to be, you know each other's strengths and each other's weaknesses. So the more you have those reps together as a strong team, I mean, it really can amplify the value that you can bring to a client. But outside of just the design and construction expertise, one thing that a strong design build team can bring to the table is just the lessons learned that we're seeing in the current market, whether it's existing projects that we're working on or projects that we've recently completed. We have sat at the interview table in the past when clients are going through Department of Energy applications for grants. We're familiar with the questions that are easy to answer and what are the ones that are harder to answer. We can bring those insights to the table. We're familiar with ways that we have navigated equipment shortages and utility shortages in the past. It's interesting to watch the way that this need for sustainable energy has really impacted the construction industry, and zero carbon footprint, things of that nature. All of a sudden, you have a client that says, well, I want to be carbon neutral, and we're not going to have any natural gas that's going to supply this site. And they pick a site where it can get cold. All right, well, all of our power is apparently going to be needing electric feeds. And now we're talking, we need electrical power source that is the size of a small city. How do you navigate that when you're learning about that after a site's been selected? A strong GC and AE partnership will know those relationships with the utility providers in the area. We'll already be having those conversations in the background, trying to prevent those things from being significant schedule delays in your project, because they want to bring that value to you. They want to be successful, just like they want a client to be successful. Those relationships, the lessons learned, the best practices, the insights, the understanding of what are the typical pitfalls that an owner that maybe they're just building one plant every decade, they shouldn't know. It's not their job to know the pitfalls in designing and building a facility. It's our job to know that. And a good partnership will absolutely bring that to the table.
Of course, yeah. So Drew, we only have a few minutes left, but I want to kind of get from you, when you think about all these uncertainties, you think about all of the places where change occurs on a project like this. If you're advising a client, an owner that's about to embark on whether it's a new facility or renovation or expansion to an existing facility, what's the most important thing they can do up front to raise that degree of certainty around these various variables?
I think it's probably one of the biggest things is defining the stakeholders in the process, because in the end, it's all about the people and how this project's going to impact the people. So, and in the end, it's the customer who decides whether the project was successful or not. So, I think someone mentioned earlier is like, hey, just go do the project. Well, that project is, if the customer cares about how that project's going to perform at the end of the day operationally, then the likelihood that a team that isn't aware of all of what their expectations is going to happen to align with that is extremely unlikely. So engaging those stakeholders and understanding what their needs are and their expectations, and giving us an opportunity to organize that, because a lot of times there's stakeholders within their customer's organization, which on the surface may be mutually exclusive. So you have to work through that so that within the customer's organization that they have alignment too. So that's probably one of the biggest things early is getting access to those people. And sometimes it's site walkthroughs. It's talking to people at existing facilities. It's on the the shipping and receiving side, operations on the lines, the plant managers. It's the people that are going to be utilizing this space that we need to really understand what's important to them, so that we can then make decisions and recommendations that they're going to like. Because if we give three options and they don't like any of them, then we failed. We need 3 options that they all like. They like all 3 of them, and there's just one that best meets their needs. So that's probably the biggest thing early.
Good. And then Brandon, kind of a similar question to you, but just along the line of final thoughts. If you had the chance to sit down with, any client, any owner, what's kind of the one thing you wish they better understood about the process from the design builder's perspective?
I'm glad you asked me that question, and I'm going to use it as a chance to answer a question you asked me earlier that I didn't get to. What are the perceived downsides of this delivery method? And it's interesting. I've had clients that are intended to pursue a design bid build. And as we have conversations around integrating a build partner earlier, there's this sense of an owner having a loss of control of the project or a loss of competitiveness in the pricing of a job. And going back to something Drew said earlier, control is an illusion. There is no controlling the market right now. So loss of control doesn't even exist. What you need to do is bring in a team that has the ability to plan, but can pivot from that plan as uncertainty and all these different factors we've talked about hit you from different sides throughout the project, so that you continue to understand the environment in real time and can make real-time decisions on how you still achieve a successful project. So it's not a loss of control. I think it's creating more mitigation for when you will lose control is an important piece. And then from a loss of competitiveness, owners will get concerned that if they go straight to a design build team, that it's going to cost more than if you have a design team completely design out a project and then you can competitively bid. It's an illusion. It's in today's environment, cost is relative in a lot of ways because the cost continues to change. But having a strong team that you can bring on board early will have significant impacts on being able to reduce your overall cost of the project, which may include your operations and maintenance piece, because you can have those conversations early. You can evaluate long-term energy uses early, and you can make smart decisions based off of what you are learning in the design phase versus finding out after the fact that something's been designed and then you need to pay for redesign or pay to have materials expedited because you're late in the game. So I think there is this sense of design build doesn't provide those advantages, in some cases provide disadvantages, control and cost competitiveness. I would strongly argue the opposite.
Gotcha. And you know what? I think that's where I want to hang our hat, because I think that absolutely kind of summarizes exactly the point we wanted to make on this webinar today, which is, that partnership is really the key to reducing the risk, increasing certainty, even in these really uncertain times. So any other questions from our audience? You got a few seconds to get those in. And while you do that, I'm just going to let you guys know this webinar has been recorded, so it'll be available sometime soon. You'll get notification about that if you want to share it with colleagues or friends, or maybe you've got kids that are having a hard time sleeping at night. Let them listen to it. That'll help. Just kidding. The other thing I want to let you guys know is, we're always looking for topics for our next webinar. So those of you that have joined us and participated, if there's something we haven't covered in a previous webinar that you're interested in knowing more about, please send an email in, let us know. We're happy to consider those suggestions. Again, this is really about you guys as the attendees and the listeners, not so much about us. So with all that said, I want to thank you guys today. The email, justin.davidson@jedun.com. It's in your chat box. Any suggestions you have, or if you need a copy of the recording, that's your email, justin.davidson@jedun.com. So thank you again to our guest, Drew, pleasure to see you. Brandon, thanks so much for joining us. Scott, always a pleasure. And I think really the biggest thanks goes to Mike Tyson. I think we can all agree that that's really the foundation for everything we talked about here. Guys, thanks so much. Have a great rest of your week and a good weekend, and we'll talk to you soon.